G'day YouTube, warbles on a lot here. Those of you who are familiar with my work may have noticed that I'm sort of used to working with bare wood and then covering it with Estopol. Now this is kind of like half a reaction against my father's habit, because he used to use Estopol and wood stain, and I was really into the idea of giving the wood its natural colour, and I liked his idea of Estopol, and I thought he knew what he was on about. And he reckoned that Estopol or varnish was much better than oil, because oil you had to constantly maintain it and it was messy, and it took a while to dry, and it was gave you a sticky finish for a while, and he had all these reasons, and his father was a wheelwright, so I figured he knew. So I took a bit of what he did and I rebelled against the idea of using wood stain. And I discovered that Estopol doesn't do so very bloody well when it's not maintained either. If you give Estopol a destruction test, 25 years in the sun and the wind and the rain, and you will be back to bare wood, in my experience. Yeah, that's what Estopol unmaintained finishes up looking like. Yes, it does indeed give you a lovely finish, but I just decided, for the hell of it, I might have a go at making a few bits of woodwork out of old crappy dried out pine or radiata pine offcuts. And I decided I didn't really want the IKEA look of bare, white, soft pine. And therefore we have beginner's adventures with walnut wood stain and Danish oil. So anybody who already knows lots and lots about staining and timber and oiling, you can tune out now, unless you just want to follow along for the shits and giggles. For anybody who's never done it before, well, I'm making a bit of a serious attempt to not make too bad of a mistake. So therefore I'm doing a few test pieces, because last time I had a go at doing what I thought I knew I was doing when I applied, quote, linseed oil onto furniture. I didn't know enough to have purchased linseed oil with a mould or fungus inhibitor, and I've thereby fairly ruined 2 of 4 chairs. The other 2 that stayed indoors, one of them survives, the other one was overloaded and broke. But yeah, this time I'm actually reading the instructions on the tin. So having bought the stain, instead of using linseed oil, I then went and bought the Danish oil, because it was recommended, and I'm paying attention. And I'm doing a little bit of learning. Here we have what was once, initially, when I very first built the thing, it was a mounting stand for a solar charge regulator. It had to be hung on a wall, so therefore I made a little tiny wall out of Tasmanian oak, offcuts from a propeller making endeavour, and the regulator hung on that hole there, and that worked for years. And then the regulator broke down and this became surplus to requirements, and then I was using it to hang on to my mobile phone. About the time I got into this woodworking being me bonnet, I decided to stick 2 blocks of pine that were offcuts from a different project entirely onto the thing to hold me mobile phone in place relatively tightly, as it does, meaning that I can now stick the actual outside case, which is not truly symmetrical, so it can go more or less anywhere, and the phone can be lent that way up if you want to use this top edge to shade the sun. and stop it from bashing onto your screen. So that worked fairly well as a learning experiment. And one of the most curious lessons I learned, see those dark stripes? What that is iron filings in the wood flour before it was mixed with the glue to make a sort of a putty substitute to fill deep cracks in the old and weathered pine. And the wood glue is acidic and the iron filings turn black. Whereas if you have clean wood shavings or wood flour, you don't get that blackening effect. As I pass that edge along there, over on that left hand edge, there's a bit of iron filing rich wood flour went into the mix there. So that's good to know. I'd never really paid much attention to that previously. And overall, my first impression is that the Danish oil is a whole lot easier and simpler and nicer to work with, and it gives you a better overall finish faster than does the Estepol. And I've discovered this at 62. My father was wrong about Estepol and oil, but then again, 40, 50 years ago when I was hearing his story, it's entirely possible that the oil he was thinking of was the stuff his father made him use and he didn't like, you know, just after the First World War kind of thing, and therefore he got out of it as soon as he could when synthetic varnishes appeared, because plastic was new and new was progress, and that's what his generation thought like. And yeah, I'm now going back to oil. So here's a couple of the results from the first two tests. Now what's going on here is I take a bit of radiata pine that's about that colour in real life, and then I've sanded it within an inch of its life, and I've put a piece of masking tape diagonally across there, and it's old tape, and it's had some dirt and crap encrusted onto the edges of the stickiness of it, so it's given a bit of a furry line there. And I've given it one coat of the stain, and I've left it on there for 10 minutes, and then I've rubbed it off and I've waited for it to dry, and then I've pulled off the masking tape, and I've discovered that it gives you a pretty shitty sort of an edge. And then I put another piece of masking tape on, and I put a metal ruler, and I've used a razor blade to cut a tighter edge onto it. And then this has had 2 coats of stain. This stuff here in the middle of the stripe at the ends, it's only had 1 coat of the stain. The bit in the very middle's had no stain, and the stuff over here's had 2 coats. So you've got 2 coats, 1 coat, no coat, and that's that cut edge. And then we do the exact same thing, only we do it with Tuna australis, otherwise known as Australian red cedar. The reason I've got it set like that is because there's a piece cut out missing and used for something else come out of here, and then this is the sapwood, the white stuff, and the stain soaks into the low density timber faster and deeper and harder and darker than it does into the high density timber. So what goes on is you get a lot of stain taken up out here by the edge timber, and you don't get so much taken up by the actual true wood. And that's a bit of a problem, because the idea of using the cedar together with the pine was to get a colour contrast. And once again, what's going on here is there was an initial diagonal overlay. Oh, was there? Yep, there was a diagonal overlay along that way and along that way, and this was a wide stripe that didn't get much, and then another overlay along there. It was a very messy sort of thing. I think that might have been the rear side of it. And on this side I was trying out an idea where I was going to use a razor blade to cut on it, and that bit fell off. It was really quite an unsuccessful test. However, I learned a lot, and this piece here shows what you get on the edges. So I learnt lots, but very glad I didn't try any of that on the finished piece. Attempt number 2, once again from old, very weathered radiator pine with, you know, deep cracks in it and all the rest of it. By that stage I'd worked out the iron filings in the wood floor problem, and once again I was trying out the idea of using a razor blade to cut masking tape after I'd applied it to the wood. And as you can see by the cleanness of the lines on the edge of the masking tape, I bought a new roll of masking tape and I didn't have that dirt. And that sort of worked more or less, kind of. You know, here I've had a diagonal stripe all the way along it, and then I've used knife and ruler to cut stripes out of it. And here I got a little bit more arty-farty, shall we say. Trying out very thin lines. Where are we? There's me. I can see almost nothing through the glare on the screen here. And then even having a go at cutting a stencil. But the problem with this is you get really, really bad overcuts with the knife going through the paper and into the wood. And yeah, once again, I learnt a lot. And in a softer piece of wood, you get the same sort of issue. Oops. This one really shows it overcuts. However, the basic concept is not yet invalidated, if you know what I mean. So that's sort of the first 3 attempts and methods of trying to mask and stain and achieve a pseudo inlay effect. Then I had a bit of a brainwave, the idea being, as well as using clean masking tape, brand new roll instead of the 15-year-old roll, not only but also have a crack using PVC tape to make the adhesive stencils from, and as well as using clean tape and a different kind of a tape, instead of sticking the tape onto the workpiece and then trying to cut away everything you don't want to be there, I just so happen to have a great big roll of this stuff. Strong, clear, plastic, I don't know, some kind of a monofilamentous material, plastic sheet. And my brainwave is to first stick the tape onto the plastic in the flat. Then do your working drawings on the tape stuck to the plastic. Then use scissors and cut out the actual sticky bit of plastic you want still stuck to the plastic. And finally, separate the two at an edge, which is really difficult, but it can be done. Peel the two apart and then apply the perfectly cut stencil, ideally, allegedly perfectly cut, to just where you want the thing. So that's the theory. And the result is, using the masking tape, the paper masking tape, this side has had 2 coats of stain and the top side has only had 1. Let's try and stabilise that picture a bit. There we go. And then if we come up, this is also the paper masking tape. Come down there and adjust the image just a frac shy on. And in this one, the top half has had 2 coats of stain, the bottom half has only had 1. And I have used a razor blade after the sticky tape came off, after the second coat of the stain to just clean up the end of the grain, and that's the flip side of that one, which was much more badly weathered, and I didn't fill any of the cracks in that one, whereas, brief little segue, I did fill the cracks in this before sanding and staining. Araldite and wood flour, and once again you've got that dark iron filing coloured wood flour. Back to the story of the staining experimentation, and this one now removes from the picture, and this one turns over, and this one comes in, right? And then we replace the paper masking tape with the PVC tape, because that's what I used here. Stick the PVC tape to my sheet of flat plastic, cut it out with scissors, apply the flat plastic, the vinyl sticker I suppose you could call it, and then go over the top with the stain. And on this one, it's this side that's had 2 coats, and that side that's only had 1 coat. And on this one, bottom side's had 1 coat, and top side's had 2 coats. And they've had 3 coats of oil, all of them. So that's what I've learned at this point. I think that if you want to have a go at putting a faux inlay pattern effect achieved with stain, then it probably can be done by masking. But you want to use this stuff, and you want to stick it to something like that before you cut it out. And then the next trick is, when you're brushing the stain on, brush from clean area out onto the area you want the stain to be. Don't ever take your brush and pull the stain up onto the edge line. If you can remember to do that, putting it on, and then when it comes time to rub it off, the smallest possible bit of cloth, and then rub it from the vinyl off towards the wood, so you don't ever try and drive the stain up against the glue line. And I think you might get an edge neater than that without having to clean it up with a razor blade. But that's just my thoughts when teaching myself to do something I've never done before. Thank you to the wind gods for interfering with the set during the final setup shot of the video. You get that, such is life. Warbles on a lot to YouTube versus the IKEA look. We have the technology, do we not? Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.